Hello friends, my name is Marines and this is a review of Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. It's going to be a little bit of a chatty review because I'm going to talk to you about my experience and feelings with these books, and then also I have like some scattered thoughts in general about like YA and my experience more lately with YA. So we'll start at the beginning. This book had been on my radar because I have a few, like a lot of mutuals who really enjoyed it, and it got a fair amount of attention and hype and accolades when it first came out. So it was like more or less on my radar, but I decided to read it now because one of the perks of being part of my membership on Bindery is that you get to suggest books for me to read. And so I collect all of my member suggestions. I've been putting them on a little spinny wheel, and then I randomly select a book for me to read and dedicate a review to. Okay. Okay, not be nervous. Okay, here you go. Raybearer! Okay, this is really exciting. Now, I launched this as a perk when I started this Bindery, but I very quickly moved from my Bindery as just like a membership platform to my Bindery as an imprint and launching Mareas and reading manuscripts. And a very like special and important announcement has already gone to my members as of recording this and will be coming out to everyone shortly here. So things like just got very busy with Mareas in this space very quickly, and I trailed behind on getting this read and reviewed, but I finally read it, which means that I can let you guys know how I feel about it, and then at the end of this video I will use my spinny wheel to select my second book in this project. Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko is a YA fantasy published in 2020 about a girl named Terasai, and she is raised very isolated from other people. She only has her tutors and teachers and her mother, who she calls the lady, who only sees her once every few years. And none of these people touch her or engage with her in a very familiar or loving way. And so she grows up in this isolation for very specific reasons. Some of them are revealed to you as you're reading, but more generally, the lady has been raising Terasai to basically take on this mission of infiltrating the Emperor's son's council, the council he is building for when he becomes the Emperor, in order to gain his trust and his love and then ultimately kill him. So Terasai travels to the capital of this global empire, and there she competes for the chance to become part of this council, which is also magical in nature. So the Emperor, the Emperor's son, basically chooses this council, and then they share a mind and emotion link that also helps make the Emperor sort of invulnerable to attack except for from inside this council. And so she is involved in this whole process. She is aware of why she is here, her mission given to her by her mother, but at the same time she's forming connections and family and trust and love for the first time in her life. I found this incredibly well done. I think the thing that shines here in this work is indeed the world building. It is so interesting and super juicy in all of its details. Ifueko is the kind of writer that lets the world build around you and that feeds things to you in like the moment that it's appropriate. I never really felt sort of like info dumped on, and there was a lot going on in terms of all of the moving parts of the plot and the characters and the world building. I loved this idea of the Ray, of the council, of the way that they were all connected by this magic, and specifically about showing us this really intricate connected relationship between these 12 people and like the different shades that that would take on. All of that was really lovely, and the culture surrounding this sort of global empire and this council who are from all of these different walks of life, like all of that was super rich. You can tell it was done from a place of like both deep knowledge and a lot of love. Not only did I have like a great sense of like where we were and all of the pieces of it, it was also really gripping and engaging, and I wanted to keep learning more about the world and these characters and turning the pages. I will say the one place that is a little bit weaker is in building the magic. There were some things that felt like the magic were like a little bit more just so than explained to us deep deeply, but I am a person who can really vibe with a just so magic system, especially if it feels rooted in something. And here, because there is such a strong sense of the world and the world building, I felt like it was fine to have like the magic sort of sit on top and just kind of be like, well, this is how it happens. This is what the magic does. So it didn't like bother me in my enjoyment of it, but it was a thing that I noted sometimes that I did have like questions about what was exactly happening with the magic. The second thing that stands out to me here are the characters, and it's super interesting because something happens here that I have like just recently complained about in another book, To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, and that is like the time jumping during sections where you're supposed to be building a world. So I talked about this when I reviewed To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, and like this is like reading that book and then Raybearer right after was just such a bad comparison for To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, because in so many ways Raybearer did all of those things much better, and then also I read To Shape a Dragon's Breath, which also did so many things much better, and these three books to me share a lot of like commonalities that make them really easy to compare and contrast. So in To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, we are supposed to be building this relationship between the colonizer prince and the colonized woman, and especially it's supposed to be like a very like deep bond because it is very manipulative on the behalf of the colonizer, and you're supposed to understand that like it is a deep enough or complex enough sort of relationship that she is like betraying her people, betraying herself, betraying her own morals, and she continues to get closer and closer. But we skip the first, like, I can't remember if it's 6 months of their relationship, like the time where they would be building that relationship. We just clear sail across from it. So we go from her like hating the colonial power to being like, but his eyes, and he's so handsome, in a way that like it just did not have the foundation to be believable. And because that book had so many other problems, specifically around that core relationship, like you felt the lack there. And Raybearer, it does skip over, we're watching Terasai age up a number of years, right? From like 10, I believe, when she goes into the city, 11 when she's chosen for the council, and she's growing up with these people. But that, because this is a pretty compact YA fantasy, we are skipping over time, right? We're like checking in with her in certain times. I think that we needed to do that, and the way that the author brought us through the story was effective. But we are at times like skipping over the deepening of a lot of these relationships. So we're checking back in, and suddenly, right, they're connected, and suddenly they've got this deeper relationship. That had the potential to weaken all of this, but to me, the strength of the characters and the characterization like was still there. And I really find myself often like super hungry for works that explore relationships just outside of romance and that give the same sort of like weight to platonic relationships and friendships and like other deep connections. And because this book showed that to me, it almost didn't matter that we were kind of skipping over some of these portions and being told, okay, they are now connected, because we still saw the strength and importance of that connection on the back end. This goes along with something that I think Ifueko does really well as well in the plot, and that is that it had a number of ways that it could have gone in a very expected and almost tropey direction, but it turned those expectations on its head. It turned those tropes on its head. For instance, Terasai's relationship with Dio, with the emperor to be, I think I probably saw one thing coming just from like tropes and expectations, and I loved the way that it flipped that. And then he, like, very luckily when you get to more reveals at the end, you're like, thank God. But also just like the exploration of like platonic love and friendship and connection, I really enjoyed here. And this also did have a romance, though. It gave space for romantic love, and it did that in a very interesting and compelling way. It gave us believable friction, but also chemistry. So all of those pieces were just well handled. To me, when I'm thinking about this, the character interactions kind of stand out a little bit more than the characters. I think Terasai is like a very capable character, and I loved her role within the story. I don't know that I find her like super memorable just as a singular character, rather than like her interaction with specifically these other characters and this world. And I loved like that role of it all. I loved who we find out she is, what she's capable of, and the way that she navigates really complex problems in a very complex world, and also in a world like they're young and they're figuring all of this out and they're being trained to take on power, but there are larger powers on top of them, and the way that she navigates all of that is really interesting as well. I loved her answers to problems. I compared this already to Shape a Dragon's Breath, and it did remind me a lot of that, and this is what kind of got me thinking down the path of like this work in like terms of YA and YA fantasy. To Shape a Dragon's Breath is published by Del Rey, which typically has just been adult books, and that is true of To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, which is also Del Rey and is also billed as adult. Of those three, To Shape a Dragon's Breath is the one that I most understand sort of being billed as adult. Even though our main character is 15, I believe in that one, she's considered an adult in her culture, and that one thematically doesn't really have like a coming of age sort of thing. It is a flat arc for our character. Our character is very settled in her own identity, and it mostly is just about sort of navigating the world, and that like looking for your place in the world is more typically a theme of new adult than it is young adult, and that is kind of where that one slotted to me. That is almost true for To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods as well, but I think the problem there is that Ruiying doesn't have that same sense of self. That is very much an exploration of self versus an exploration of the world, and her like character's motivations are very selfish and they're very internal and they're very small in the scope of like this colonial story that is supposed to be told. And that book itself actually is very tropey, and it follows very strictly some of these tropes that are like very associated to me with young adult, and the way that the story is told and presented also feels very young adult to me as well. Raybearer and To Shape a Dragon's Breath really take these tropes and turn them. Now, Raybearer is the only one that I'm talking about here that is like actually solidly YA and that also reads that way. There is a way that like the story is approached that you can tell is very digestible and for young audiences, and has those like themes that fit in squarely with YA, and where you can see that the intended audience is in mind with the telling of the story, but that an adult audience can enjoy it as well. I don't know if you guys remember several years ago on BookTube where people felt the necessity to sort of like formally quit reading YA. This came about because like YA was like the preferred age category on BookTube for a very long time. Like YA dominated BookTube conversations, much in the same way that like romance does on Book Talk. So YA was like the big thing that everybody was reading, but as like more people joined, as older people joined, as the people who were in BookTube were aging, it became almost this reckoning of like reading YA and having to like formally resign from the experience. I'm sure you can still find plenty of videos out there talking about like why I don't read YA, why I'm quitting reading YA, why I don't feel like, and this like all fed into the constant conversation that we were having about young adult literature and what it was and who it was for and whether adults can read young adult literature. There were a lot of people who came out at this time of like, I read YA, adults read YA, of like taking that stance of like reading YA was okay because young adult has an intended audience, but it was saturating the market in a way that was like bleeding out of it, right? So we had all of this discourse around YA. I also fell into this when I like started making content and my reading like picked up, because that's what happens usually, right? You get immersed in a community and you start doing and reading more and more. I started buying more and more books, and I was reading almost primarily all young adult literature. But at that point, I think I was in my like mid 20s, and so I was getting older, and so I also had that like reckoning, not publicly though, I never made a video, but just like with myself. I did talk about it in terms of like sometimes in like tracking my reading and setting goals. I wanted to read more adult books. I wanted to like have a more even split between my YA and adult reading was one of my goals at one point. And so like I also had these thoughts about like where young adult literature fit into my reading. And that's like so funny for me to think about, because these days I read so little YA compared to everything else that I read. I've almost entirely cut out reading contemporary YA from my reading. So like there has been a very significant shift for me in my own personal reading. This is not like commentary about whether or not adults should be reading YA. I still read YA, but it just made me like even more appreciative of coming across Raybearer and just seeing what like good YA looks like. It felt like it had so much care and was so well done, was just a reminder of like how I fell in love with this age category back when I started BookTube. I think the reason I'm also thinking about this is I know that this is like a little chatty and scattered, but again, the reason this is at the forefront is because like the way this has shifted into like this weird nebulous place where things are coming out that are being billed as new adult, but there isn't a very strong like sort of identity for what new adult even is. And so many times that I'm reading these new adult works, it feels like it's just a young adult book with a character slightly aged up and no other care for what it means to be in this age category. And so you have a book that just feels and reads like young adult, but these characters that are old enough to be doing sort of adult things in a way that has left me really uncomfy. And I haven't had the best track record in finding books that are in that new adult space that feel well done and feel like they're giving quality. And so again, just coming back to Raybearer and finding like a true YA book that was done very well, like set off all of these thoughts. Does that all did that all make sense? I'm curious for you guys who are watching if you had like a similar sort of trajectory. I feel like for a lot of millennials especially, like what we were reading, a lot of times we went straight into sort of adult books from like our kids books, Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High, Goosebumps, the things that we were reading as children. There wasn't a really well-defined young adult category when we were actually those ages. And the young adult boom happened when a lot of us were in our 20s already and getting immersed in that through online communities. So I'm curious if like people who are around my age had the same trajectory, or if you're younger than me, if you like read YA, that boom of YA when you were the target audience. And now that you're, you know, aging, how your relationship with YA has changed and like where that comes from. Because again, to me, it was never a thing of like, I don't think adults should be reading YA or I think YA is bad. Obviously there are examples of like brilliant YA, but it was a matter of like aging out of the themes and in a way, and not entirely, right? Obviously those are still themes and stories that I want to read, but from like it being the only or the majority thing that I was reading, right? It did become about oversaturation for me as well. And it's such a weird thing to reflect back on, but those are the feelings that reading Raybearer gave me. And I think it's really interesting to think about the pushback that we had from like the height of BookTube against YA and compare that to the pushback that romance is getting from the height of book talk as like the sort of genre where YA is an age category, but like as the genre that is dominating that space and all of the discourse that is coming out of it. And oftentimes with this discourse about YA, about romance, about who's reading it or whatever, it ends up being really anti those age categories or genres, even from the people that think they are defending it, like, you know, writing hard for romance, but using language and or things or saying things that are actually really insulting to romance. Like I see a lot of like, well, this is our, we don't have to think about romance. It's like brain off and things that it's like, not, it's kind of insulting. Like a well-written romance is hard to do and you can engage with romance like any other written literature, and not all of it has to be like very serious, but it also isn't just like work you wholesale can like sort of write off or not engage with or don't have to pay attention to. I don't know, those parallels are really interesting to me in terms of like romance has always been a thing. Romance has always been like the leader in sales. This is not me saying that like Book Talk made romance, but romance is just like the genre that dominates Book Talk in a way that changes like the conversation and the discourse around it in a way that we saw similar things, I think, for YA in the height of like the BookTube space. Hopefully that all made sense, but the long and short of it is that I very much enjoyed Raybearer. I'm pretty sure Cadence was the one who added this. I did not keep track of these when I wrote them down, but I have a vague memory of Cadence being the one who suggested this one to me. If that is wrong, I'm so sorry. So yes, now that I actually finished my first book in this project, applause, applause, I can choose my second one. I was so nervous. Are you serious right now? I was like 2 for 2, where it was like, but we are reading Serafina. That's really funny because this is another dragon book, and like Year of the Dragon. I said last year that I was gonna read a bunch of dragon books and like do a comparison contrast sort of thing, and that fell by the wayside. But Serafina was one of the books on that TBR. I'm not like promising anything here on like a dragon reading project, but this feels like a sign at the very least. I have escaped Manacle again, and I will be reading Serafina next. I will have dragon feelings in this next video, so be on the lookout for that. And if you want to nominate a book for me to read, you can become part of my Bindery membership. And if you are already a member and want to add more books to this recommendation, come on over to the lounge on Discord, the Bindery Lounge, and you can drop your recommendations for this wheel in there. I cannot believe I escaped Manacled yet again. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.